You faced pandemic challenges when developing Immortals of... Is it Aveum?
Aveum.
Aveum, okay.
Yeah. By the way, here's another tip. Don't launch a game where people can't pronounce the title.
Okay. I don't even know whether I should cut it or not, or keep it as is. Today we will talk about the beauty and pitfalls of starting a brand new IP. Why is it so hard to compete with franchises and sequels? How to make people vote with their wallets? How to build teams from scratch? And how to recover after the game flopped? Watch this episode to know the answers. Today we have an amazing guest with me, Bret Robbins. Hi, Bret.
Hey, how you doing?
Also very selfishly excited to ask you all of these questions as somebody who runs a studio myself, and like every day is like, I'm not sure how am I doing it. Bret is probably one of the most honored guests of our podcast. You're one of the Dead Space original creators. For almost a decade, you were a creative director at Call of Duty at Sledgehammer Games. You started your own studio and released a AAA title. You even were nominated for a BAFTA award. So the list of achievements in the industry is insane. But what are you personally proud of the most in your career?
Yeah, building Ascendant Studios and launching Immortals of Aveum was certainly the biggest challenge of my career, and the thing I'm most proud of, even though the game didn't do all that well. It was such a journey, creating a whole team, doing an original IP from scratch, and then, launching it. It was certainly the most growth I've ever done as a developer, and put me through the most challenges I've ever had. Call of Duty was amazing. Dead Space was amazing. These were great games. But there was something uniquely challenging about starting something entirely new.
We're beyond excited to bring this episode in partnership with Devoted Fusion. If you're a gaming studio hunting for insanely talented freelance artists, or you're an artist searching for a new gig, Devoted Fusion makes it super easy to connect and work on projects together. We take care of payments, paperwork, everything that people hate, so everybody can work and focus on creating the best content they can. If you're interested, check the link in the description of the video.
I'm just curious about the legendary Dead Space. What was the feeling early days, and then how did you make it? Like, what was the thing that you feel like actually made Dead Space so successful?
It was such a fun project to work on. Like, I can honestly say that, a lot of times games can be really hard to make. It's, everyone hears legendary stories about how painful it can be to create a game. Dead Space wasn't that. It was really fun. We had a great group of people, core group that had worked together for at least 10 years at that point. Glenn, Chris Stone, myself, several others. We had done a few projects together. Some of us had worked at Crystal Dynamics together and really started in the industry together. So we had a great core group, and we just had so much fun making that game. So I think that fun translated onto the screen largely. I really give a lot of credit to Glenn for getting that game greenlit and getting it started. He, sort of in a way forced EA's hand to get it off the ground, and then he really allowed us to be very creative and very open in what we were doing. I was largely responsible for the game design and the levels, the combat, the meta systems. I felt like it was my baby. It was an opportunity to really do something new and different. And as to why it was successful, I think we chose to do only a few things and do them well. So rather than making something that was, trying to put every feature possible into the game, we focused on a few things and just went very deep with them. And I think we're really successful with them. The dismemberment combat, diegetic, 3D HUD, the no cutscenes, the fact that you're constantly in danger, being threatened the whole time. that constant immersion, I think, was really strong in that game. It didn't exactly set the world on fire when it came out. It was sort of a sleeper hit. We didn't have a large marketing budget. It was a lot of word of mouth. And I think people were just surprised to find it and to enjoy it, and then they told everyone about it. And so there was a sense of like, people got to own the game themselves because they found it, as opposed to a huge marketing campaign that was telling them this is the best game in the world, you got to play it, you got to play it. It was more like, hey, I just discovered this thing. It's fucking awesome. I got to tell everyone about it. So there was just like, I think that's what has contributed to having this cult following after so many years, my hope is that EA picks it up and does another one, because it's collecting dust right now. The remake was awesome. That team did an amazing job. I was super excited about that. They really honored the game, and apparently it certainly critically did well. I think it commercially did well too. So the franchise has plenty of fans out there. They should make another one. That's my message to EA. Make another one.
Well, you and me met in 2008. Right? When do we start? Yeah, around that time, right? So before the crazy VC boom investing into video games industry, and we've seen like a lot of games launched and being shut down within like weeks or months after, and like the studios also shut down. You, unlike a lot of other folks who started the studio and didn't have the success of the game that you wanted, actually were managed to sell, transition, now a part of a bigger studio. So it is a success story here in a way, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
We launched Immortals of Aveum. It was fairly well received from the critics, but quite possibly the worst time in video game history to launch a new title. We were sandwiched between, Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, Spider-Man 2, there was an Assassin's Creed game, there was Tears of the Kingdom, there was Jedi Survivor. It was a complete murderer's row of amazing games. And I think a lot of games that had been delayed, that COVID had sort of pushed out, suddenly 2023 was the year everything was getting released. We tried to create awareness for an entirely new game, an entirely new studio in the middle of all that. For sure, the game wasn't perfect. There were things that I think could have been better about it, but it was such a crowded field that I'll never know how much of it was the game and how much of it was the market. The timing was absolutely terrible. So we got lost in all of that. We didn't sell well. And then we spent about a year looking for investments. And as you know, this is maybe the most difficult period in video game history for trying to, find investment. We see, we all see the layoffs every single day. We see studios closing. There was certainly a huge investment push during COVID, and that was a real sugar high. And now we're absolutely in the contraction period after that, where it's brutal out there. So, even though we had launched a very impressive, in my opinion, AAA game as a new studio on new technology, on Unreal 5, we couldn't really find our next job right away. And it wasn't until we met the people at Absurd Ventures that we were able to really, find a home. And they were looking for a great team to make a great new game. And we got really lucky with that. And it's been great. It's been a great partnership. I'm super excited about it. Can't say anything about it. Just what's known publicly, that it's, Dan Houser's company. He founded Rockstar, and he has been a great creative partner. Really enjoy working with him.
I'm wondering, for a team that is out there that launched a title or lost funding and hasn't launched the title yet, and kind of on the last leg of that time, what would be your recommendation? Would you be trying to sell your game, or would you try to like find an angle? Okay, like we're a good team that works in a good, like in specific genre and has the specific experience. Would you be now looking back trying to sell the team and the experience or sell a new game?
My opinion is the team always comes first. I think any investor, I believe, should understand that it is so hard to create a great team and to have them work well together, and especially if they've been sort of put through the fire together of shipping a game. That there's nothing more valuable than that. And I think these really successful studios that you see in the AAA space that have been around for 20 years, the Naughty Dogs and the Insomniacs and Rocksteady, and largely they were studios with a core leadership that was there the entire time, that really understands how to work well together. So yeah, I think as much as you can, if you're in that unfortunate situation of trying to get funding or find a home for your team, it's the accolades of the team that people are going to look at, because they might have a project that is in the middle of development that they really need someone for, and you're coming in with this amazing experience, or they might really want the game you're building, but nothing beats a really experienced team. The two key things to making a great game to me are amazing vision, very clear vision, creative vision, and unwavering creative vision, because nothing will fuck up a project quicker than changing what the project is in the middle of it. You have to have a very clear vision, and then you have to have a great team. So I would sell the team.
When you were working on Call of Duty, both Call of Duty and Dead Space, you were working with Glenn Schofield, right? So both of you left and started your own studios, and both of those games didn't reach a commercial success. That like Callisto Protocol came out, was also like extremely good feedback around the visuals and like how scary it was, but never really kind of grabbed the audience. And like both of you came from like major AAA publishers where the success was reached. Do you feel like it's harder to launch a AAA title when it's like a new IP, whether it's harder because you don't have a giant machine behind you? Like, what do you see like some similarities or like some learnings, like being within a larger publisher versus being on your own solo journey?
Launching new IP is maybe the hardest thing you can do in the industry, especially the AAA level. There's an enormous amount of great original IP being created in the independent game space, in the indie space, because that's where you can take risks. You can take a $500,000 risk, $1 million risk on some crazy idea. And some of my favorite games to play are indie games. It's so much harder in the AAA space for a number of reasons. And this is why, I think we complain a lot about publishers not taking more risks. I certainly complain about it, but being on the other side of it's 100% understandable. You are competing for attention against titles that have been beloved for 20 years. You're competing for time with live service games that largely dominate gamers' time, pulling them away from a game that they have spent, 400 hours and $4,000 on over the course of playing it. Or, it's trying to get that, create something that rises above that noise and breaks through is incredibly challenging. And you don't even get really a break from the critics. So one thing that I thought I would get is at least the critics going, well, you're making something brand new, good job. We need more of this in the industry. And that's just not really the case, because it's hard for, I think, critics to understand something that's new and different. Maybe they put people reviewing the game that, like on Call of Duty, I always knew our Metacritic would be within a certain range. And one of the reasons was because they would put a journalist on it that understood Call of Duty. You know, they just knew what they were getting, basically. And that's an advantage of a long-running franchise. People have a lot coming into it. With a new IP, they don't. So everything's new. And maybe you get someone that doesn't like this particular thing or that particular thing, and it's understandable, you know, but you're not going to get a break for creating something just because it's original. In fact, you have so much to prove because you're up against headwinds of amazing games that have been out for many, many years. And then just trying to rise above the noise, you know, so much game time is locked up into, I don't know, a handful of games that people play constantly. I mean, even setting aside games like Minecraft and Roblox, which actually are the majority of gaming time, or mobile. Now you're talking about, you know, the latest season of Call of Duty Warzone and Apex Legends and Fortnite and on and on and on. The amount of time and energy that is spent on a fraction of gamer time to try to rise above the noise is enormous. So it's just very hard.
So what do you do? Like looking back, like imagine a world with butterflies and unicorns, right? Where you get to relaunch or rebuild the game. Like how would you do it differently now?
The big learning for me for a new studio, even an old studio, but for a new IP, I think is a very long marketing campaign. Take a long time to build awareness. Incrementally, you know, it can be protracted. You don't need to be constantly releasing updates or, you know, videos or anything, but it just takes a long time for for things to kind of embed themselves in people's consciousness. And there is so much noise out there. I mean, there's so much, and it's very mercurial and quick. Things just appear and disappear very, very quickly. So I think you just need to have a very like a long-term plan on building awareness. Like what we failed to do on Immortals was really engage with the community over a long period of time. We sort of tried to do a short marketing campaign, shock and awe, like, you know, spend a lot of money in a quick amount of time, which can work, but if you don't capture people in that short amount of time, you're screwed. So I think it's, you know, hindsight for me is spend a lot of time with the fans, talking to them, updating them, building awareness of the IP. I think now more than ever, it's the most challenging time with so much out there, so much noise to break through. Yeah, it takes time.
And yet you're working on something new and not sharing what you're working on. So how does that work?
We will share as soon as we're ready, as soon as we're able.
Okay.
I promise.
Well, how do you well, I wonder if that's what makes people not share early enough, where they feel like they're not ready, like you're never ready, like, oh, but maybe next milestone. When is a ready?
That's a great question. I think what we found is that fans or gamers are very open to seeing work in progress. As developers, we're terrified of it. We don't want to show anything broken, anything bad. We don't want to get a bad word of mouth. But I think if you frame it very clearly, like this is work in progress, these are ideas. I mean, we see the success all the time of early access games. You know, as long as the message is very clear, this is a work in progress, it seems like gamers are pretty forgiving to that, and they'll accept it. They'll feel some ownership in there. Like we want to hear your feedback. Tell us what's going on with the game, how you feel about it, even though it's still, being worked on. And I think marketing can work the same way. We're showing you things in development. We're eager to hear how you're reacting to it, and let us know. And then there's sort of a buy-in, which is a genuine buy-in, because as developers, we really want to know what people think of the things we're doing. So I think 10 years ago, a AAA game, the idea was entirely don't show anything, show as little as possible, maybe a little gameplay, a few cinematic videos that look really impressive, but really it's a black box, and you're just going to launch it and surprise everyone. And I don't know if that can maybe still work, but I don't think it's as smart as engage, as much as you can.
Before launching the studio, you were a creative director, which is a leading role, but it's still in the creative space, right? It's not like managing day-to-day budgets and hiring, firing, scaling, HR, payroll, like all of the fun things that you have to do as a CEO. Everybody wants that job, but I don't think no one actually understands how annoying that job is. So can you tell me like the transition between a creative director to a CEO? Like, what was different for you? Like, what were the cool, crazy, sad, happy learnings? What would you do differently now, knowing back the journey?
So for a long time, I'd been a creative director. I had done that on several games, and you're really looking at everything through a certain sort of narrow window. I mean, even though the window that I looked at everything through was game design, which is a very all-encompassing, field. Like, the game has to be fun, it has to be, compelling. The vision of the game has to be crystal clear. All these things, that is really important and foundational for a game, but it is one lens. And yeah, when I became a CEO and built my own studio and my own team, there were just a lot more considerations. I was now, it wasn't just the creative direction of the game design. It was the art and the engineering and the hiring, and like you said, the HR and the budget. The budget was a big one. I had the luxury of working on some pretty big budget games, Call of Duty being probably the biggest. And I had the luxury of not thinking too much about the spend. It was, what do we do to make this the absolute best game in the world every year? And let's spare no expense to do that. And that changed radically, having my own studio, not having an unlimited budget, and having to watch every dollar. And you get really smart and scrappy, and you're thinking of how the game and the game design can actually benefit from being more economical. And it turns out you can be very economical. And one thing I haven't talked a lot about, but Immortals of Aveum, while it was a AAA game, it came in at a very, what I would call a pretty modest budget for what most studios spend on AAA games these days. So I'm very proud of that we were able to deliver something that I think totally punched above its weight and looked great and played great and was a really compelling 25 hours of gameplay at, what it arguably is a half of a standard AAA budget, or maybe even less. So we found ways to be economical and efficient, and that was always a struggle and something new for me. But we got really smart about it really quickly. When the dollars start burning, you start to get really smart about how to spend them.
A part of me wants every game designer to feel what you felt, because one thing as a creative director, you want all of these features, and engineering needs to figure out how to do it, and like the EP needs to figure out the budget. Now you're CEO and you want all of these things, and you're like, dang, that costs a lot of money. Like, do I want this feature? Do I not want this feature? How do I measure it? I feel like that's an experience that everybody needs to go through to actually be smart about building.
I think there's a bit of a fallacy around creativity, that I think people think you want a complete, blank canvas. You want the ability to do everything and anything. You don't want restrictions. And I actually think most creativity and most really interesting design comes from restrictions, comes from strong walls and parameters that you're putting around the thing you're trying to create. And money is one of them. I mean, budget is certainly one of them. And I think you can get really creative in how you build something, just, through necessity. One example of that, for Immortals was how we did all of our motion capture. We found this great company, XNs, that uses GPS tracking suits. This was right when COVID hit. So suddenly we couldn't capture on a big stage with a bunch of people. There was all these restrictions about having a lot of people in the same room. So we had to get smart and get creative, and we used these suits exclusively where we could capture one person at a time or two people at a time safely. And we did all of our cinematics in Immortals without using a volume, without using, renting an expensive big area with a lot of cameras, how it's done, traditionally. We were able to do that game without that, and it was born of necessity because of COVID, but it ended up saving us millions of dollars. So that's just one example. There's 100 others of, how do you take the money you have, the situation you have, and get really smart about it and get really creative about it.
Savings and optimization is the most creative part of game development. I mean, I honestly think that endless money kills creativity because you don't have to make a decision. And when you have a short amount of money and a short amount of runway, you have to make decisions. I was actually reading the other day about the Jeff Bezos's approach. Like, you look at Amazon and it moves really fast. Like, it's a giant corporation, but it operates like as a startup. There's a lot of innovation coming out of it. And one of the approaches that they have is that people get stuck because they feel like any decision can make or break a company. And Jeff's approach is there's two types of decisions. One, which is you make a decision, and if it doesn't work, you revert back to the previous one, but you try. And then the other type of a decision is the ones that can make or break a company, so you take a little bit more time. So if this decision cannot make or break the company, just make whatever decision, see how it works out, and then if it doesn't work, revert back. So, and I kind of tell myself a lot of times, I'm like, will it kill us? But every decision feels like it can, especially in the market that is very brutal right now. So I wonder how you guys approach that.
Sometimes a bad decision is better than no decision. Being in, analysis paralysis, not being able to, move your team forward while you're burning, all that money, whatever money you have, that is a terrible place to be. And I think, I certainly operate with make the decision, using, the best data that you have for that particular moment, move forward, course correct as you go, but, keep things moving. And I guess, it's a cliche at this point, but fail fast. The faster you can fail and move on, and learn something from it, the better. We learn 10 times more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So it's okay to fail to a point, as long as you don't bankrupt yourself in the process. But you can fail within a certain level of risk tolerance, and then just have keep everyone moving forward in that one direction. To your point about unlimited money, this is not a problem most developers.
Love that. Let's talk more about that one.
but I think the real danger that happens when you have a large amount of money or a large amount of time, it can happen as well, is, and I mentioned this before, shifting vision. I've never seen projects get in more trouble or get killed faster when it's the vision that really becomes the problem. We want to change the genre or make a fundamental change to the gameplay. This is now a different type of game. We're coming at it from an entirely different angle. Or you see this a lot. A new leadership team comes in and wants to change a lot of things about a particular project. The reason Immortals was able to ship, largely on time and on budget And the reason every Call of Duty I worked on, was pretty successful by those metrics too, we were just, crystal clear on the vision from the beginning. Dead Space was the same way. Glenn and I think, really set that vision, and we had other people helping to set that vision right from the beginning. The first few months, we knew this was going to be a survival horror space game that is a lot like Resident Evil 4 and a lot like Event Horizon, and it's going to mix those two things up. And a lot of the decisions that were great about Dead Space, the dismemberment, the no HUD, those are early decisions. So I think, when you're creating a new IP, you want to have a very clear vision up front, and then you want to have 3 or 4 things or 5 things that are the hills you're going to die on. And you just say, you know what, no matter what happens, we need to stick with this. We need to make this, we need to prove this. We need to make this work. And it, the project may collapse because of this, but we have to try these things. You can pivot, to some degree, but pivoting too much, that's when I think projects really get fucked.
Well, we talked a lot about failing. Let's talk a little bit about rising, right? The early days of Ascendant, when everything felt like you can change the industry, you can make a difference in your team's life and then the industry in general. Like, what worked? You guys scaled really fast. I know that you were very lucky going into Telltale collapsing, going into like a gathering of Telltale folks and just like hiring half of the people in a bar, the same net. Was that how it worked?
Yeah, that's a real story. Yeah, we had been, I think I had founded the company 2 months before, and we had, there was like 5 of us, and we were...
I remember when it was 1 of you. So not even 5 of you.
Yeah,
so...
it was just me for a little bit, and that was terrifying. But then it was 5 of us, and we were sharing an office with Free Range Games. The CEO of Free Range, Chris Scholes, is an old friend of mine, very old friend, great friend.
Very young old friend. Hi, Chris.
Well, not that young. And we had been sharing that office and just getting started. And then we got the news that Telltale Games was shutting down entirely. Very suddenly. They announced to the team, in one morning that it was over. So, and they happened to be a few miles away from, their studio was a few miles away from where we were. We heard of that news, and then we heard that a bunch of them were gathering at a bar in San Rafael, which is close to our office, called the Mayflower. And we got in our cars and drove right over, and we're going to talk to them. And literally, I just started talking to people there and saying, hey, this is terrible. What's happened? I'm starting a new game studio. If you're interested, I'd love to talk to you. And from that meeting, from that bar, I hired my art director, another...
Hi, Dave.
Hired Dave. What would become another art director, Julia, a bunch of people. 7 or 8 people, and then a few more later on down the road. But it was terrible for them. Just a horrible situation. Suddenly,
I don't know. Sounds lucky to me, because how long were they out of job? Like 2 weeks?
Well, yeah. For the people that I took on, it was a few weeks. But there was like over 200 developers there that they just were left, to the wind, and they had to find jobs and everything. So it was a terrible situation for them. But yeah, fortunate for me, and for we hired some amazing people, and people that I still work with today.
But you grew significantly, pretty rapidly. Like you got to over 100 team members, plus probably external development, like within a year-ish.
No, it was slower than that. We got up to about 30 within a year, and we kept it around 30 to 40 for about 2 years. And really the big inflection point for the game was we had been doing a lot of experimentation and doing kind of crazy stuff with, this idea of being a magic shooter. And about a year and a half in, and we had a team of about 30, 35, I realized we just had to, first off, more importantly than anything, make a great shooter. And we could do a lot of weird, crazy stuff on top of that, but we needed to prove to ourselves that we could make a really competent shooter that you could pick up and play and it was fun. And I sort of redirected the whole team to do that. And, to my earlier point about changing vision, this wasn't really a vision change because we always were going to be a magic shooter, but it was more of a pivot in that, well, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do it by doing the fundamentals first and then do the experimentation on top of a strong foundation. And that really changed the whole game. Once we had this great demo that showed how fun combat could be and shooting could be as a battle mage, that got us the EA deal for marketing, that opened up a lot of things. But we were still 30, 35 people then, maybe 40. And it wasn't until I think year 3 that we really started ramping up. Once we knew what the game was and we could start building it, then it was like, okay, content, like start building levels, start building enemies, start building out the cinematics, the whole game. And that's when you need a lot of people.
You mentioned earlier to me that you feel like you should have been marketed to a different type of players instead of being marketed in the shooter space. It could have been something else. Could you elaborate for me and for the players so that we can learn from that as well?
It's hard to say like what marketing message would have really resonated, but I think that clearly the message that didn't resonate was this was Magic Call of Duty. And that was a very early message we had. It landed with the wrong audience because I don't think Call of Duty players want really to be magical. I was a Call of Duty player for a long time, and I think I understand that crowd to some degree. I think that was a misstep early that we did correct, and we messaged quite a bit differently. Really, I think our main audience, and even if people that played it today, it's probably more of the action adventure, not really of the hardcore shooter crowd. It's not really a game for them. And even the mechanics of the game don't really lend itself to that. But, if you just want a fun action game, or, Doom is a great example. In fact, we looked at Doom a lot when we were building Immortals because we wanted an arena shooter with a lot of crazy enemies and a lot of, fantastic effects going off. And Doom does that brilliantly. So if you like that kind of thing, which is like, it's a shooter, but it's an action shooter. It's not a hardcore shooter in the way that Call of Duty is. That was probably more of the crowd. And then if you like, a great story and you like very inventive worlds. So I think we could have appealed to that crowd a lot more than we did, especially early on.
You faced pandemic challenges you shared a little earlier. You mentioned that the studio was local and you could, could hire in the Bay Area and originally the Telltale folks. How did you adapt your, hiring processes, collaboration between the teams?
Yeah, I mean, like everyone else, we were absolutely unprepared for the pandemic. We had all been in office. We had hired locally. The Bay Area has an enormous amount of, talent in the gaming space, in tech in general. So, hiring wasn't that difficult to find great people, but, we were all local and in the office together. I remember the day very clearly when, I had to tell the whole team, hey, we're closing up. We're gonna, we're gonna take our computers, take them home. We're gonna get on Slack and on Zoom, and we were on Google Meets and stuff, and figure out how to make this work. And it was crazy. I mean, it was a crazy time. But yeah, the one thing that did happen, and this happened, kind of over the next several months, was the ability to do remote work and remote hiring, and suddenly cast a much wider net than the Bay Area for talent. So, location didn't matter anymore, and we could hire someone who was amazing in Texas or Florida or Canada or, Ukraine or anywhere else really. And I mean, it really allowed us to hire quickly and to find really great people and just to cast a much wider net. The downside, and I think a lot of companies are realizing this now and have been over the last few years, is you do end up having a real disconnection from I think the game and the people. I found that if people we hired had always been remote, had never spent time with myself or with the leadership of the team in person, had never really created those bonds, it was very easy for people to leave, to not be really bought in with what we're doing. There's something about the in-person chemistry, especially when you're doing something really creative, like making a game, that is pretty important. And it was really hard to ship Immortals with a remote staff. I was used to shipping games. Those last 6 months are so critical when everything's come together and you're really just polishing the experience. Not having the leadership right there where you're just all in the room together, that was tough.
How did all of this learnings of the remote team and out of office, how is that affecting how you build things right now?
Well, we all learned how to communicate well remotely. So yeah, at Absurd, we're largely in office, and I think that's a great policy in my opinion, as far as getting everyone together and being creative together. I think that's every company has, and every studio has some degree of external development. So you're still gonna need those remote, I guess you call them skills, the best practices of working remotely.
But you won't hire internal staff externally, like at a different state or a different place anymore, which is majority of your team right now on site in Marin?
The majority is on site in Marin, yeah. Never say never, but the plan is to have our core group here, core leadership group, and our main senior staff in person together.
Interesting. I feel like, all of us were like so excited about like remote collaboration, working from home in your PJs, which is still my motto. But a part of me kind of yawns for like that by the cooler conversation. And at Devoted, we do a lot of on-sites with the team. Like I either fly into different places and we fly like few other folks, and that few day collaboration in the same space, I feel like just creates such a foundation of trust and like feeling that those people will have your back when shit goes down. And I don't think you can build that in a remote way fully, because you're talking with the person and then you're like, oh, something is going on Slack, and you're constantly distracted.
I like being around the team, and I think that is there's benefits there, and there's certainly some benefits for people working remotely. So I'm not taking away from that. I'm not saying that's that one is absolutely better than the other, but the benefits that we get from being on site are pretty strong. So that'll be interesting.
Well, speaking about games, right? Because, that's sort of where we started is, one part of it is launching a studio. Well, the other part of it is starting a new original IP. How would you approach it now with everything that you know? And I think you guys announced some stuff about what you're doing at the Absurd Marine, which is a story-driven adventure game based on an announced new IP. So it is a new IP, right? So without going into, what you guys are building, how would you approach building a new IP and making it successful outside of just marketing part?
This will be the fourth new AAA IP I've been able to start in my career, which I think for a lot of developers is four more than they've had. It's such a rare thing to be able to do it. And that's not me bragging. It's just, it speaks to how difficult it is to do these things, and why a lot of people don't take that risk. But yeah, Dead Space was one of them. Immortals was one of them. I did a game in the 90s called Akuji the Heartless, which was an original IP. Going back to what we talked about previously, the number one most important thing is clarity of vision. You have to have that vision of what the game is early. You need to do everything in your power to really define that, and use all sorts of tools to visualize it and let people see. You can talk about it all you want, but people really have to see it. And this isn't, I'm not talking about like investors or publishers. I'm talking about the team. The team needs to really understand what you're creating and use, prototyping and PowerPoint and documents and concept art and everything you can, just to create that amazing, clear vision. And a lot of times we call it vibe, like the vibe of the game and the vision of the game and what you're really trying to create. Do that as early as possible. One of the things about pitching games and having to go out on the road and have like an idea for a game and pitching it is that you really have to sort of clarify. It's a forcing function to clarify that vision. And I think, establishing that as early as possible and getting as much buy-in from the team and understanding from the team as early as possible is the absolute key. So, spending the first several months to create a prototype or to create a great deck or something, or a great video, something that shows what you want to make. And then I think the other big piece, and we did this on Dead Space, I did this on Immortals, doing it now, is have 4 or 5 pillars that are the most important things for the game, and they're the filter to which everything falls through. No one really knows what's going to be successful in the game. We can all theorize and think, and we're all, armchair quarterbacks, and we can look at a game and go, of course it was successful because of this, but you actually don't ever know. So you have to just believe. It's an act of faith and belief to say, it is this vision with these pillars underneath it that are rock solid, that are the foundation. That's what we're going to battle with. We're going to make this thing. And again, you can pivot here and there a little bit, but it needs to be pretty rock solid early.
Well, I'm a big adept of quantum physics. And, if we all share the same vision, we can bring that shared vision to life. If only one of us has one vision and everybody else has different vision, then we're going to bring to life a Frankenstein. Which a lot of projects, and sometimes even things I do are like, wait, did I really allocate time to make sure that everybody on the team has the buy-in and we're sharing the same vision, or no?
When you start a project, you don't necessarily know what that vision is 100%. You may have a couple ideas. So you have to spend the time to work on the vision itself. Usually the first thing I do on a new project is create a vision document that's just working really hard to think about what I want that to be, what I want the game to be. I'm not saying it's the guaranteed way towards success. I think you do make your life a lot harder if you're not doing that, and if you're not doing it constantly throughout.
Well, speaking about writing and tools, I feel like the biggest amount of talk right now in the game development AI space is about using AI for writing quests and writing, whatever needs to be. I was actually thinking today, I was like, if I put some of the Jira descriptions for the engineers that I've written for years, if I put it into ChatGPT and then using that, have ChatGPT write me the description for the engineers, I'm like, that should work, right? So do you guys use any AI tools? Are you planning to use? Are you testing things out? What works, what doesn't?
I think I'd say we're squarely in the testing phase of just trying to figure it out. I think like a lot of people are. It's a difficult subject because, I don't think there's any doubt in video games or in any other industry, it's going to be disruptive. And it's going to be, there's people's jobs that are on the line because of it. So I don't know to what extent we're going to use it. I think you could already see that, using ChatGPT as an assistant, as a virtual assistant in some ways can be helpful. I don't know, I don't know if that's just making us more efficient or taking people's jobs or anything. I hope it doesn't.
I want to be more efficient. There's stuff that I like that I spent time on, and so far I don't feel like ChatGPT taken any jobs besides giving me time to breathe and think and actually be more creative. I'm not an advocate for, but I feel like, there's certain things that people don't love doing. We usually have a section, the podcast, which is called fail stories, but I feel like today we talked a lot about what didn't work. So I actually wanted to try a different angle. And can you share a case where the idea seemed crazy and hopeless in the beginning, and people said that it would definitely fail, but eventually it succeeded?
Yeah, when I think about a crazy idea that I was really worried about that actually turned out really cool, for Dead Space, it was certainly dismemberment. The fact that was going to be our key pillar for combat, it was certainly appropriate to a bloody horror game, and the idea of having to chop off limbs and stuff. But it was such a strange concept at the time to think of, are we really going to build all the combat around this? I mean, this is 2006, and we're, talking about that I'm used to headshots and cool weapons and, how is this strategic element that is going to be difficult to pull off and difficult for players to do off the controller? We're really going to make this a core pillar. And it just ended up influencing everything in that game. On the combat side, it influenced the weapon design 100%. You're now creating weapons for dismemberment. It totally affected enemy design in a really interesting way, where you can shoot them, where you can't shoot, where you're not supposed to shoot them, what they're going to do when they lose a limb. All that was super interesting. It was just a really interesting design case of taking a strange idea. And we see this, I think we see it more in the indie space, but we certainly see it occasionally in AAA, of taking a strange idea that's a little unusual and then going all in and saying every aspect of this is going to, we're going to evangelize and make this really key pillar of the game. And that'll make it memorable and make it signature. Anyway, that turned out to be a big success, and I was dubious about it at first. I thought it was going to be a disaster. And as soon as we started getting some enemies up and some cool weapons and seeing the different effects of how the creatures were responding, it was like, oh, okay, all right, this is actually pretty cool. There's something here.
Well, if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about Dead Space, we also have an episode with Jesse Lee about Dead Space creation and all the cool art stuff. So you can find the link in the bottom to learn a little bit more about the Dead Space crazy, creepy dismemberment and all the creatures and creepy crawlers that were a part of it. Our last part of the episode is Blitz, which is short questions. The first question would be the best franchise in the culture ever. It could be any art, literature, music, cinema, video games, etc.
Well, the first thing that jumps to mind is Star Wars.
The best video game ever.
I'm just doing what comes to mind first. Resident Evil 4.
The latest video game you played, and how was it?
I am playing Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I'm almost finished with my New Game Plus run. And it's fantastic. And I'm really, hats off to those guys. They did an amazing, amazing game.
The best game designer in the industry ever.
Miyamoto.
What would you prefer, to launch a new IP or Dead Space 4?
Launch a new IP, which is what I'm doing right now.
What is your best hope for future of independent AAA studios and the development of new IPs?
My hope is that publishers and investors and the people with capital figure out ways to take risks on bigger games that are new and original. And it's hard to do, and we've spent a lot of time today talking about how hard it is and how risky it is, and that's why they don't do it. But I think there are ways with, starting with small teams and prototyping and proving out ideas. A lot of these companies have a lot of money, and they can they can really invest in their future and in gaming's future by putting that money towards creative projects. And I know some companies do it. I've heard stories of big companies that do a lot of research and development, but not enough do it. If it's not going to come from them, it's going to be very hard. It's always going to be a grassroots, things that become hits and they grow organically and become huge, and that's fine. That's totally valid. But the big guys could also come in. They've got the resources to really help shape and create exciting new IP. And so I would hope that they get more risky and try to really create something amazing, because without creativity, without new IP, every single franchise we play right now was an original IP at some point, and we need new ones.
Well, with that in mind, I hope our next time we chat online would be the time that you're going to be announcing to our viewers the cool new IP you guys are working on and the learnings that came with that. So, Bret, thank you so much. Appreciate your time coming in and vulnerably sharing about your experience. I feel like this has been the most vulnerable podcast because a lot of time we talk about only good stuff that happens in the industry, and your story is really inspiring, how you can rise like a phoenix and, continue, improve, invest, grow your team, build dreams, and make stuff happen. So thank you, Bret, so much.
Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.